Hello and welcome to another edition of Pocono Mountains Podcast. I'm Jim Hamill. We're glad you've found us and are listening to some of the interesting stories that make the Poconos a unique place to visit, live, and work. In the previous 4 episodes, we've paid visits to Stroudsburg, Milford, Honesdale, and Jim Thorpe. Now we're heading back to Jim Thorpe, a town that is steeped in history, and owes that to one individual whose mansion still sits on the hill in town, preserved to how it looked in the mid-1800s. Asa Packer, the railroad tycoon who founded Lehigh University and was one of the richest men in America at the time. We'll hear from Ron Sheehan, who was one of the caretakers for the Asa Packer mansion in Jim Thorpe. Then we'll dive into the natural resource that fueled the industrial growth in the United States around that same time, anthracite coal. Scott Herring is with the No. 9 Coal Mine and Museum, and he sits down with host Chris Barrett to share his knowledge of the historical significance of coal mining more than a century ago. You can visit both the mine and museum as well as the mansion on a visit to historic Jim Thorpe, one of the most charming, architecturally rich small towns in America. And it's right here in the Poconos, a year-round destination for millions, with 2,400 square miles of mountains, lakes, rivers, forests, and historic downtowns, as well as iconic family resorts. It's the perfect getaway for a weekend or even an entire week. You can always find out more on PoconoMountains.com or watch Pocono Television Network, streaming live 24/7. Thanks for listening to Pocono Mountains Podcast. We will have a new episode each week highlighting lots of the fun things you can experience while you're visiting the Poconos. Now, Ron Sheehan sits down with Chris Barrett at the Asa Packer Mansion in Jim Thorpe to talk about the man who pioneered the expansion of the railroad.
Ron Sheehan, who was Asa Packer and why is he a key figure in American history?
Well, Asa Packer actually started the Industrial Revolution, or was one of the major drivers of the Industrial Revolution. His predates a lot of the people that we normally associate with the Industrial Revolution. He started in the shipping of coal, then built a railroad, and got anthracite coal down to the markets of Philadelphia, which was very important because once they learned how to control the burning of anthracite coal, it really took off and really built the Industrial Revolution in America.
So who were some of those figures and what was the Industrial Revolution in America?
Well, the coal was originally discovered by Josiah White in Summit Hill, just one town over. Then originally it was transported by canal, which was a very dangerous way to navigate the Lehigh River and get it to the ports in Easton and Philadelphia. Mr. Packer came along at the age of, I believe when he came to Mock Chunk, he would have been around 30 years old. Started as a canal boat builder, then later worked for the LC&N as a boat captain. He later tried to talk to the Lehigh Valley Railroad into going into the railroad for the transportation of coal. They kind of brushed it off, and he went and originally started building the Lehigh Valley Railroad for another business concern, and later expanded it to the point it was a paper railroad. He later ended up owning it, renaming the railroad the Lehigh Valley Railroad, and actually opened up a lot of markets. He expanded the railroad north and south to go into New York City and to the ports of Philadelphia, where the markets were.
So what is the LCN? What was the LCN?
The LC&N was the Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company. They started with the transportation of coal by canal boat. Mr. Packer's association with the LC&N during the canal boat building days actually helped him in the development of Carbon County itself. When Mr. Packer served in the state legislature from 1841 to 1843, he was instrumental in the push to get Carbon County created by carving out sections of Northampton and Monroe County. Later, after he came out of the legislature, he teamed up with some of his partners that he used to deal with at the LCNN, and they created the push to have Mock Chunk, Pennsylvania, named as the county seat of the newly formed Carbon County.
So we're here at the Asa Packer Mansion in Jim Thorpe, and we're with Ron Sheehan. He is the executive director of this mansion. He also happens to be the treasurer of Carbon County. So we're in for a real treat here as we talk about the history of Asa Packer, about the mansion itself, and about how Mount Chunk has developed into Jim Thorpe. So Ron, tell us a little bit about the man Asa Packer. What was he like? Who were his contemporaries at the time, for instance?
Sure. What you have to realize is Mr. Packer was born in 1805 in Mystic, Connecticut. At the age of about 13, he hiked and traveled from Mystic, Connecticut to a town called Brooklyn in Susquehanna County to meet up with a cousin. That in itself was pretty amazing for a 13-year-old.
How long would that have taken at that time?
I would venture to say that it had to have taken him at least 3 weeks to a month. He settled in Brooklyn, Susquehanna County. That's where he met Sarah Minerva Blakesley, who he married. And at first he tried his hand at farming and did not succeed. The following year, he came to Mock Chunk as a canal boat builder. He had that experience from working with his father in the shipyards at Mystic, Connecticut. He built the canal boats. He later earned enough money doing that he opened up a market in Mock Chunk, was very successful at that. He took on contracts to build a paper railroad. At that time they had a charter. I believe the name of the railroad was the Delaware, Susquehanna, and Lehigh Railroad. And as he built it, they paid him in stock because the railroad wasn't actually in operation. Again, it was just a paper railroad. So by the time the railroad was built up and running, he had a controlling interest in the railroad, and he renamed it the Lehigh Valley Railroad.
So how much did the Lehigh Valley Railroad, from as its beginnings as a paper railroad, eventually be worth over time?
Well, at the time of Mr. Packer's death in 1879, he was one of the wealthiest men in the United States. His estate at that time was valued at about $54 million. And with that, he was also a very generous person, always remembering his humble beginnings. The family had endowed churches, they built hospitals. He was also gave a land grant and initial $500,000 for the building of Lehigh University.
So Lehigh University now is one of the premier engineering schools in America. And from what I read, he actually, the first 20 years was tuition free, correct?
Right. Initially, Lehigh University was tuition free because after Mr. Packer gave the initial $500,000, he later endowed some of the buildings, Packer Hall, the Linderman Library, named after his daughter Lucy, who married Dr. Garrett Linderman and actually lived in Bethlehem. He later added money so that the first couple of years of tuition were actually free as well. The reason Lehigh University became noted as an engineering school was Mr. Packer saw the need that a lot of good engineering minds were lost during the Civil War. So he felt the only way that America could continue to expand was to have good engineering background.
So he obviously was around during the Civil War. He served in the in federal government. He was a congressman. So in the 1850s, who would his contemporaries have been in Congress? Would he have known Lincoln? Would he have known those luminaries?
He certainly would have known Lincoln. He was a friend of James Buchanan, although he left office before Buchanan became president. He would have served with Buchanan as a U.S. congressman at the time. Mr. Packer was anti-slavery. He would have been there for a lot of the tensions leading up to the Civil War, and it is believed that he stepped away from the U.S. Congress knowing that war was going to break out and that his attentions would probably be more beneficial to the North if he continued with the railroad enterprise, which could then fuel the making of iron, steel, and other items that were needed to move the war progress forward.
So he would have been, knowing those contemporaries, he would have actually been involved probably in some of the discussions that led to secession. So he would have known Jefferson Davis.
Absolutely, he would have been there during the Kansas-Nebraska Act, some of the major legislation that actually led to the outbreak of the Civil War. He was there for the most tense portions of that, and he probably had the foresight that war was just on the horizon.
So he would have been one of the key industrialists that supplied the North during that time period.
Oh yeah, he would have taken coal and iron ore and coke into what later became Bethlehem Steel. He did own some ground down in Bethlehem that he lent out to the troops for training camp purposes. So yeah, he was definitely involved in the war effort, but not so much in the political realm. He later got back into politics later on. In 1869, he was a candidate in nomination at the Democratic National Convention. He bowed out after the third ballot. In 1869, he ran for governor, and he lost that race by one of the narrowest margins in state election history, by about 4,600 votes to John Cleary. His political record is pretty impressive for a man who had no formal education at all.
And that's really, to me, astounding. And if I were a citizen at the time of Mount Chunk, before it was Jim Thorpe, and I saw him walking down the street, what was he like? What was he like as a person?
He was a very humble man, very quiet. He gave very few open floor speeches to the Assembly in Pennsylvania or in U.S. Congress. There's very few speeches on that. During the time that he was trying to create Carbon County, he did a lot of negotiation behind the scenes. His wife, again, being very humble, she stayed here in Mock Chunk, which allowed him to spend his time in Harrisburg, and in the evenings he would take state representatives and state senators and actually wine and dine them and talk to them on a one basis. There were previous attempts to form Carbon County that were unsuccessful. Mr. Packer did it, but he did it in a very quiet, persuasive way.
Tell the story about how the mansion exists today and what you're seeing. It's one of the only mansions that's pretty much like it was when it was turned over in 1912, correct?
Right. The whole history is Mr. Packer built the home in 1860. It went through major renovations in 1876 in preparation for Mr. and Mrs. Packer's 50th wedding anniversary. At that time, that would have been a pretty amazing feat to have both husband and wife live to see a 50th wedding anniversary. Not only that, but the minister who married them was still alive, and he actually signed the family Bible that's sitting on the table directly behind us. Like I said, the home was built in 1860, major renovation 1876, which made it convenient because Mr. Packer served on the U.S. Centennial Commission, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the United States, and they had an exposition in Philadelphia. When the exposition broke up, the members of the commission were allowed to buy various items. So there are many items here. For instance, the chandelier in his office took first place in interior lighting at the exposition, and he brought it here to the mansion. What makes the mansion interesting is it predates the homes that we're familiar with, like Biltmore or Newport, Rhode Island. What makes it even more interesting is when Asa's last child died, Mary, in 1912, she had the foresight to realize that, hey, my dad was pretty special to America, and she willed this home and all of its contents, right down to the hairbrushes and combs on the dresser, to the borough of Mock Chunk in 1912. The borough, not knowing what to do with it at the time, left it sit bottled up from 1912 until 1954. The Bear Mountain Lions Club, which later became the Jim Thorpe Lions Club, petitioned the borough for trusteeship, and it took them about 2 years to clean the home up, but they opened it to the public on Memorial Day 1956 and have been running it ever since. And it got its National Historic Landmark status in 1985. Again, what makes the home so unique is it's practically a time capsule. When you think that only one family ever lived here and everything in the home was theirs. Nothing was brought in to dress up an empty room. No family members through the generations took anything out of the home. It's truly amazing, and it's like stepping back into time because everything is just where they left it when they died.
So any guest who would come in here would see the home almost exactly the way they saw it.
Oh, absolutely. You're walking on the original carpets. You're seeing the paintings on the walls in exactly the same location where the Packers would have had it. So it's basically like walking through the home while the Packers are away on vacation. It's truly remarkable.
Wow. And then their children, were any of them as successful as their father? And how did that really?
Well, it's kind of tragic. Asa died in 1879. He left an estate worth about $54 million to his wife, Sarah. Sarah passed away in 1881, followed by Robert in 1882, and son Harry in 1883. By 1884, Mary was the last surviving child with an estate worth about $54 million. So kind of tragic. Robert actually lived in Sayre, Pennsylvania. He controlled the expansion of the railroad into New York. Lehigh Valley shops were located in Sayre. When Robert died, his sister Mary willed his home and a portion of money and founded Robert Packer Hospital, which is still in existence as Robert Packer Hospital and the Guthrie Clinic in Sayre. Harry lived directly next door. Harry was only about 34 when he passed away of Bright's disease. Harry's responsibility was to take care of the family name here in their main hometown of Mock Chunk, while Asa was actually spending a lot of time either in Bethlehem or at his home in Spruce Street, Philadelphia, expanding the main corpus of the corporation.
You talked a lot about how he had an effect here on the larger businesses. At that point in time when he was like, what did Mount Chunk and Carbon County look like? What was it like?
Well, Mock Chunk was actually two towns during the time of Packer's day. The Lehigh River divided the town. What we're sitting in now is presently Mock Chunk. On the other side of the river was East Mock Chunk. And Jim Thorpe, the town, when it got incorporated in 1956, and is now a major tourism center because we have whitewater rafting, we have hiking, people come here for the architecture. You have to realize a lot of the trails that people are biking on and hiking are old railroad beds. The scenery coming down through the Lehigh River, a lot of it is views that were created by the railroads that ran along the river. Ray Street, which is known for all of its little quaint little shops, those were company homes built by Packer. St. Mark's Church, where Jim Thorpe is very lucky in that it has two National Historic Landmarks, both the mansion here and St. Mark's Church. Mr. Packer and his family belonged to St. Mark's Church and endowed it with a lot of the things. So even though the last of the Packers died in 1912, we're still seeing progress in this area due to what they left behind. It's really impressive when you think that when Mary died in 1912, that she had the foresight to leave the entire house intact and say, you know what, Dad was important to the Lehigh Valley area, and someday they're going to want to recognize that.
Again, I want to thank Rung for hosting us here at the mansion. It's just a wonderful place to view our early history and the Poconos place within American history. So for Ron, I'm Chris Barrett at the Asa Packer Mansion in Jim Thorpe for Pocono Perspectives. Thanks for watching.
Our thanks to Ron Sheehan and Chris Barrett for that look at a man who shaped the Poconos region to this day, Asa Packer. The mansion is a must visit when you're in Jim Thorpe. Thanks again for listening to Pocono Mountains Podcast. You can subscribe to us anywhere podcasts are available. For more information, just head to PoconoMountains.com. We'll be right back after this.
Hospitality in the Poconos is an up-and-coming growing feature.
Personally, what I love about being in the hospitality industry and food and beverage is the creativity that we're allowed to have.
So you can start out in a part-time position, and really if you fall in love with it, you can look at full-time positions and really start to grow.
You're part of a family here.
We do have great income in the Poconos.
Pocono hospitality, it's not just our job, it's our passion and our way of life.
Welcome back. I'm Jim Hamill. Chris and Ron spoke about a titan of industry in the 1800s, and any discussion of that era would not be complete without discussing anthracite coal and the mines that sustained the Industrial Revolution that were based in Carbon County, where Jim Thorpe is the county seat. We now join Chris Barrett and Scott Herring from another episode of Pocono Perspectives.
Hi everyone, you are watching Pocono Perspectives. I'm Chris Barrett for the PTN Network, that's the Pocono Television Network, and I'm here with a gentleman who had the Herculean task of organizing the 250th anniversary of anthracite mining in the United States, and it was a task. So he and I have talked a lot. We have been at number 9 mine in Lehighton. We've talked all things anthracite. He and I have a very, very common history. So we're going to talk about all great things, anthracite, the 250th, and we're in the Asa Packer Mansion, right, Scott?
That's right. And who better than to start off the tradition of anthracite mining in this area, other than Asa Packer.
Right, and the railroad pieces and everything like that, he was just such a central figure, and not only to this region and to Pennsylvania, but to America, right?
Well, very much so, and he was a very prominent American as well, too. A friend of presidents, he was a senator, and one of the most successful and wealthiest industrialists of his age. And he started off, of course, in our area, rebuilding canal boats, and then dominated part of that industry, made enough money in that industry to invest in his own railroad.
Because he was a carpenter, right?
That's right. And he was really a Renaissance man, a jack of all trades. He was successful at basically everything he ever did. And he also was part of Packer, Carter and Company, which was his own coal mining company as well. So he had the railroads, the coal, after he had made some money in the rebuilding of canal boats.
So talk a little bit about when he came to town, but basically what the area was like at that time. How prevalent was anthracite? Was it discovered at that time?
Yes, anthracite had been known in the region even before our first settlements in our region, which, by the way, our 250th from last year, 2018, was based on. But that was back in 1768. And that preceded really the Industrial Revolution kicking off, but this was one of the locations for it. For instance, our gravity railroad here, which was the first of its type, was from May of 1827. And once that started in, with the canal boats as well, coal started flowing out of this area, and it fueled the Industrial Revolution here in America.
Talk a little bit about the Industrial Revolution. So why was anthracite coal so important to that?
Well, proximity was one thing. Although it was very hard to get in and out of our mountains here, there were only 7 natural gaps into the coal region, as we call it, which is northeastern Pennsylvania. But river navigation was the only choice they had, because our mountains aren't especially high, but they're very steep. So wagoning out goods, and coal in particular with the weight of it, was just impractical. So it was the development of the canals and the weights that they could carry that really allowed it to take off. And of course, by 1827, here in what used to be called Mock Chunk, that all started in.
So at the same time, and I know the county names were different, but was Luzerne and Lackawanna County, Schuylkill, were they all somewhat developing the same way that carbon was at the time in Monroe?
Carbon was earlier, what was here, a little bit earlier. Schuylkill would come a little bit later. But by the same token, Schuylkill has still the oldest operating coal railroad in the entire New World. We set the patterns, the terminology, and often supplied the material that launched the Industrial Revolution across the rest of the country.
And wasn't it, from what I understand, we had talked to Ron Sheehan about Asa Packer and the Lehigh Valley Railroad and coal getting from this region to Philadelphia and to New York. So can we say that, or could we say that that coal ended up fueling the rest of the world's Industrial Revolution after ours?
Well, it certainly did America's. And what happened here as in the long run, of course, was that we were more successful at it probably than anywhere else. That's why we called the 20th century the American century, because the foundation that we set here in places like what was called Mauch Chunk in the 1800s allowed us to dominate industry across the planet in the next century. And we were, of course, the largest industrialized country in the 20th century. There's no doubt about it.
How did these industrialists really deal with labor? Because there are a lot of things that happened here in the Northeast that really kind of set the stage for labor, correct?
Well, probably the most important things happened early here. For instance, the coal region here of northeastern Pennsylvania is where the WBA, Workmen's Benevolent Association, truly one of the first unions, was developed to try to control the fact that people were exploited. Now, one of the things we need to say as we sit here in the Packer Mansion is Asa Packer was not an example of that exploitation. He was universally regarded as a very good man. As soon as the mining companies, some of them, the worst examples, felt that things were getting out of hand, they would bring in their own private police forces, whether it was people they hired or forces they developed themselves. This was before there was a state police in Pennsylvania here. And they would put down these often legitimate complaints that were behind these riots in brutal fashion. And unfortunately, of course, once things get to the riot stage because they've gone too far, then everything's out of control and then bad things happen. And our region is unfortunately filled with stories of that.
So how and why did coal decline?
Well, there's sort of an analogy with our canals here. The canals allowed the movement of coal and iron ore to fuel the anthracite iron industry, which was the precursor to steel in this country. The anthracite iron industry allowed rails to be made, which were then used to build railroads, which replaced the canals. Similarly, anthracite was really square one in heavy industry for this country. And it did such a great job of generating wealth, skilled labor, technological development, that it actually brought on, not only through investment, but through technology and people knowing what to do with it, all of these other energy functions which replaced it. But that's the natural evolution of something that's a great idea for its time, evolving into better technology.
So this area really felt the brunt of that.
Oh, sure it did.
Decline.
It was stage one in that evolution that overtook it. Yes, that's correct. But that shows you what a great job we did here. As an example, anthracite investment, let's use the steel industry as an example. Anthracite investment from Charlemagne Tower, who was a coal baron out of Pottsville. He is memorialized in Tower, Minnesota, because it was anthracite money that he made as a coal baron in Pottsville that developed the Minnesota Iron Range, which was the greatest source of iron through America's industrialization in the 20th century.
You have something for us, is that right?
Yes, we do.
So what is that? Oh,
This is Pennsylvania anthracite.
I love it.
As you well know, what your grandfather used to mine and what I and my father and my Well, going back 5 generations in my family used to mine. But this is Pennsylvania anthracite, which is a stunningly beautiful mineral. It is an environmental blessing to America that here in the Northeast, when we were using anthracite was largely non-polluting.
So let's talk a little bit about the guests that would come here to Jim Thorpe, which was Mount Chunk. Obviously, the Asa Packer Museum, which is a must-see.
Absolutely.
Harry Packer's Museum is also here. What about number 9? I wanted to talk a little bit about number 9 too.
Just 12 minutes over the mountain to the west is Lansford, Pennsylvania. The number 9 is one of our 3 tourist mines in the region, all of which are wonderful. It's the newest of our 3 tourist mines, but it's the oldest coal mine you can tour in America. And one of the things that the number 9 did was, as you well know from having been in there several times, they left it very rustic. There is no doubt when you were in there that you were in the coal mine as it really was.
Right.
It's not been cleaned up, it's not been touristed up, it's pretty much right on the money.
What about the displays that are there?
The Wash Shanty
Right, the
Museum.
Wash Shanty, right.
Yeah, it was the old clothing changing house. And that still exists, of course. And the clothing on the last day of operation that was hanging up to dry, because coal mining is a very wet process, that's still hanging there, by the way, and has been since 1972 when the mine shut down. And in around it, we have taken the Wash Shanty and we've made it a really wonderful museum. That in itself is worth the visit, but then when you go in the mine, you get the train ride in. That train ride's memorable, as you know.
Yes, it is.
And it's a great ride in, and then you come out, and for the folks that would be scared about this because they think it's all claustrophobic, number 9, like many of our larger collieries in the region, was a very big production mine. And it was for 117 years without interruption. Number 9 is roughly 10 by 12 feet is the openings of the...
It doesn't feel claustrophobic.
Oh, not at all. It's bigger than some guest bedrooms.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
And it goes on for 1,600 feet that way. So most people are not going to feel claustrophobic at all. They enjoy it once they're in there.
But the thing that I loved about it was when you went in, you could see where the actual hospital was, where there were offices that were actually down inside the mine. And you really get the feeling that you're a miner.
Oh, yes.
And for the first time, I thought to myself, I kind of knew what my grandfather must have felt like every day going into the mine and every day coming out.
But remember, this was normal to him.
Right.
We all thought that that's the way it should be, and it didn't bother them. They would have liked working in a big open mine like the number 9. Now, the number 9, and you can't deny this about any large colliery here in northeastern Pennsylvania. Anthracite is an exceedingly dangerous, and still is, occupation. So there were people who were killed in that process, and that's true of any mine tour. But, and our ghost hunters, by the way, love that, who come to check these
We have to
mine
save that
tours
for
out.
another one. But
Yeah,
I'd like to go back
that's
to-
another story. But we also have the remnants of the shaft, which was the elevator in the center of the mine once you go in to get down to the other 3 levels. That still exists. It's the only one you can see. We show the mule ways, which is how we used to get the mules from one level to the other back before we had electric mine motors pulling the loaded train cars out. We had mules pulling wooden cars that were driven by, of course, little boys, really, to bring, their job was to bring the cars out of the mine. That's all very, very much evident at the number 9.
Yeah, it's almost going back, almost like Asa Packer in a way. It really seems like you're going back in time.
Oh, it is.
And it's a very immersive experience. So like this would be, I mean, coming in here, it's so overwhelming. Everywhere you look, there's a story, and the folks here are very, very knowledgeable about it. But same thing at number 9. If you really want to immerse yourself in the experience, you have the people there that do it. So you get that feeling.
And the tours are very good in all 3 of our mine tours, and number 9 is very much up there with them.
Oh,
And it's an exceptional tour. It's a great blessing to our region here in northeastern Pennsylvania that we have the residual of all of this history, heritage, and industry that went on. And it's really a blessing too, because of proximity, to the visitors that come to our region. You know, right here as we sit in Jim Thorpe, we are within a day's drive of 20% of the population of the United States.
Right.
1 day's drive, not even a long day in most cases. And this is a great place to come and visit, you know, even just for a long weekend. But if you come for a long weekend, you'll be coming back.
Right.
Because there's so much to see. I can't think of other areas, not only in mining, but in a lot of other tourist venues, where you have so much in such a concentrated area. I would say this is Grand Central to it here in Jim Thorpe. We have tremendous things that can keep you busy for 2 or 3 trips within half an hour or 45 minutes of this location.
So you look here and you have the steam engine, you have the mansion, you have number 9.
Yeah, you
So-
got it all.
But this could go on for hours, and I would love it to. We got to save the ghost stories for the next one.
Okay.
But I've been really fortunate to be here with Scott Herring. He was the gentleman who put together the 250th anniversary of Anthracite. We touched on some things, but I really want to encourage all of you that to visit Jim Thorpe, to visit the Asa Packer Mansion, to visit number 9 mine, and to delve a little bit into a really important part of United States history and, of course, the northeastern Pennsylvania region. I'm Chris Barrett for Scott. You are watching Pocono Perspectives. Again, thank you for watching.
All these years later, both Asa Packer and those who work the coal mines are remembered for their contributions to the great advancements in our region. We hope you enjoyed Pocono Mountains podcast. We'll have another episode each week, and you're not going to want to miss the next one, as Chris Barrett sits down with Mr. Pocono, Mr. Bob Ugassini himself, also known as Mr. U. Please remember to subscribe anywhere podcasts are available. Come visit us in the Pocono Mountains. Plan your trip today.